The water filling my lungs tasted like copper, and the expensive champagne my husband Dominic had poured for me just an hour ago. As I sank beneath the freezing waves of the Atlantic, I didn't look at the dark water. I looked up. Standing on the deck of our yacht, illuminated by the moonlight, was Dominic. His arm was wrapped tightly around the waist of my best friend, Chloe. They were smiling. My heart stopped, my vision faded to black, and my last thought was a vow written in my own blood. But death wasn't the end. When I opened my eyes, the calendar read exactly 1 year earlier. Dominic was going to pay, and I was going to use his greatest fear, his older brother, to destroy him. The betrayal didn't begin with the shove that sent me over the railing of the Ocean Queen, our multi-million-dollar yacht. It began years ago, woven into the very fabric of the life I thought I was building. My name is Clara Montgomery, or it was. For 3 years, I was the devoted fiancée and then the dutiful wife to Dominic Hayes. The Hayes family was royalty in Boston real estate magnates who owned half the skyline and influenced the rest. I was the naive architect who fell for the charming golden boy heir. I designed his buildings, I managed his temper, and I trusted him with my life. That trust ended on a Tuesday in November. "You look beautiful tonight, Clara," Dominic had whispered, handing me a crystal flute of Dom Perignon. We were celebrating our first wedding anniversary. The ocean air was crisp, the sky scattered with stars. "Thank you." I had smiled, taking a sip. The champagne tasted strange, bitter, metallic. I frowned, looking down at the glass. "Does this taste off to you?" Before I could process the sudden heaviness in my limbs, the cabin door slid open. Out stepped Chloe Barrett, my maid of honor, my college roommate, my confidant. She was wearing Dominic's silk robe, her blonde hair tangled from sleep. My brain, sluggish from whatever was in my drink, couldn't make the connection fast enough. "Chloe, what are you—" Dominic's hand clamped over my mouth. His eyes, usually warm, hazel, were dead and cold. "I'm sorry, Clara, but the prenuptial agreement is ironclad. If I divorce you, I lose the Montgomery shares your father left you. If I am a grieving widower, I get everything, and Chloe gets me." You've been so incredibly boring, Clara." Chloe sneered, stepping up beside him, her hand casually stroking his chest. "Always working, always trying to be the perfect little wife. It's exhausting just watching you. Say goodnight." The poison paralyzed my vocal cords. I couldn't scream. I could only stare in wide-eyed, absolute horror as the man I loved lifted me by my waist. The physical pain of the shove was nothing compared to the shattering of my soul. I hit the icy Atlantic water hard. The cold was a physical blow driving the remaining air from my lungs. I sank like a stone. Looking up through the distorting lens of the salt water, I saw their silhouettes. They were laughing. Then darkness. Complete, suffocating nothingness. Gasp. My eyes flew open. I bolted upright, my hands clawing at my throat. I expected to feel the freezing ocean, but my fingers tangled in high-thread count Egyptian cotton. I was hyperventilating, sweat pouring down my face, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Clara, hey Clara, breathe." A hand touched my shoulder. I recoiled, a feral scream tearing from my throat as I scrambled back against a tufted leather headboard. I was in a bedroom. A massive, familiar bedroom overlooking the Boston skyline. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I looked frantically at the person sitting on the edge of the bed. It wasn't Dominic. It was my younger sister, Lily. "Lily," I choked out, my voice raspy. "You're..." You're supposed to be in London. Lily looked at me with deep concern, handing me a glass of water. London, Clara? I don't leave for my semester abroad until next spring. Did you have a nightmare you're shaking? I ignored the water and grabbed my phone from the nightstand. My hands trembled so violently I dropped it twice before I could read the lock screen. October 12th. It wasn't just the wrong month. It was the wrong year. It was exactly 14 months before the night on the yacht. It was the day of the annual Hayes Foundation Gala. The day Dominic formally announced our engagement to the press. I dropped the phone, staring at my hands. They were warm. My lungs drew in sweet, unhindered air. I wasn't dead. I was back. Clara, seriously, you're scaring me. Are you okay to get ready? Dominic's stylist is coming at 3 to fit your dress for tonight. Dominic. The name tasted like ash and poison in my mouth. A chilling calmness suddenly washed over me, freezing the panic in my veins. The universe had pulled me from the watery grave for one reason. I wasn't brought back to survive. I was brought back to destroy. I'm fine, Lily. I said, my voice dropping an octave devoid of its usual warmth. I threw off the covers and stood up, my legs steadying with every second. Cancel the stylist. I'm picking my own dress for tonight. The Hayes Foundation Gala was held at the Grand Ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. It was a sea of diamonds-tailored tuxedos and fake smiles. 14 months ago, or what felt like yesterday to me, I had walked into this room clinging to Dominic's arm, wearing a demure, pale pink gown, blushing as he introduced me as his future bride. Tonight, I walked in alone. I had chosen a dress the old Clara would never have dared to wear, a backless floor-length gown of midnight blue velvet that clung to every curve, paired with an antique sapphire necklace from my mother's vault. The moment I stepped past the velvet ropes, heads turned. I spotted Dominic instantly. He was standing by the champagne tower, looking immaculate in a Tom Ford tuxedo. And right beside him, pretending to be utterly captivated by the orchestra, was Chloe. Seeing them together sent a violent jolt of nausea through my stomach. I remembered the cold water. I remembered her wearing his robe. My fingernails dug into my palms until they bled the sharp pain, keeping my rage in check. Not yet, I told myself. If I kill them now, it's too easy. They need to lose everything first. Dominic's eyes finally found me across the room. His jaw dropped slightly, a flash of genuine surprise crossing his features before he smoothed it into his practiced, charming smile. He whispered something to Chloe and began making his way toward me. I didn't wait for him. I turned on my heel and walked directly toward the darkened private library adjoining the ballroom. I had a specific target tonight, and it wasn't my fiancé. The library was quiet, the heavy oak doors shutting out the symphony and the chatter. The air smelled of aged paper, expensive cigars, and aged scotch. Sitting in a high-backed leather wing chair by the unlit fireplace was a man shrouded in the shadows. Nathaniel Hayes, Dominic's older half-brother, the black sheep. The ruthless, cold-blooded venture capitalist who had built his own empire independent of the Hayes family money. Nathaniel was everything Dominic wasn't: brutally honest, terrifyingly intelligent, and utterly devoid of the need to be liked. Dominic despised him, but more importantly, Dominic was terrified of him. "Lost Miss Montgomery!" A deep, gravelly voice cut through the silence. Nathaniel stepped out of the shadows. He was devastatingly handsome, but in a harsh, unforgiving way. Sharp jawline, piercing ice-blue eyes, and a tall, imposing frame that radiated danger. He held a glass of amber liquid, studying me like a predator assessing a new species of prey. Not at all, Nathaniel. I said, my voice steady as I walked closer to him, stopping just inches away. I was looking for you. His dark eyebrows arched. Dominic's little lamb is looking for the big bad wolf. That's a dangerous game. Shouldn't you be out there practicing your blushing bride routine? I'm not marrying Dominic, I said flatly. Nathaniel froze the rim of his glass, pausing an inch from his lips. For a man who never showed surprise, his sudden stillness spoke volumes. Excuse me. I know about his embezzlement from the Hayes Foundation. I lied smoothly. Well, it was a half-lie. I knew he would embezzle the money in 6 months using my architectural firm as a shell company. I also know he's sleeping with my maid of honor. I refuse to be collateral damage in his pathetic life. Nathaniel slowly lowered his glass, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. Why are you telling me this? Because you need a wife. I laid my cards on the table. Your grandfather's will stipulates that you don't inherit the controlling shares of Hayes Global unless you are married and stable by your 35th birthday, which is in exactly 3 weeks. You've been trying to find a woman who won't be intimidated by you, won't pry into your business, and won't fall in love with you. Nathaniel stepped into my personal space. The sheer dominant aura of the man would have sent the old Clara running. The new Clara met his gaze flawlessly. And you think you are that woman? He murmured, his voice dangerously low. I know I am, I replied, not backing down. I want revenge on Dominic. I want him to watch me take the one thing he feels entitled to power. You want the company. If we marry, you get the shares, and I get the protection and the platform to destroy your brother. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. He searched my eyes for any sign of hesitation, any trace of the timid girl he had dismissed 100 times before. He found nothing but ice. Slowly, a dark, devastating smirk spread across Nathaniel's face. You've changed, Clara. I don't know what snapped inside that pretty head of yours, but I like it. He held out his hand. We have a deal. But be warned, if you cross me, Dominic will be the least of your worries. I took his hand. His grip was firm, hot, and electric. If I cross you, Nathaniel, you have my permission to throw me in the ocean. He didn't know how literal I was. Ladies and gentlemen, the booming voice of Arthur Hayes, the patriarch of the family, echoed through the ballroom microphone. The music faded, and the hundreds of guests turned their attention to the grand staircase. Standing on the landing was Dominic, looking like a prince out of a fairy tale. He beamed down at the crowd, playing the role of the love-struck heir to perfection. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, concealed slightly by a massive floral arrangement. Tonight is a special night, Arthur continued, raising a glass. Not only are we celebrating the incredible work of the foundation, but my son, Dominic, has a special announcement. Dominic took the microphone from his father. He looked out over the crowd, his eyes scanning for me. He looked confused for a fraction of a second when he didn't see me in the front row where I was supposed to be waiting for my cue. Thank you, Father, Dominic said, his voice dripping with charisma. Tonight, I am the luckiest man in the world. I am so incredibly honored to ask the woman of my dreams to share my life. Clara Montgomery, will you please come up here? The spotlight swept across the room, searching. The crowd murmured. Chloe, standing near the front, craned her neck, a faux sweet smile plastered on her face. I stepped out from behind the flowers, but I didn't walk toward the stairs. I walked toward the center of the dance floor. The spotlight hit me, illuminating the midnight blue velvet of my dress. Dominic, I said. I had a lapel microphone handed to me by one of Nathaniel's security men just moments before. My voice echoed cleanly through the massive room, cutting through the silence. I am so touched by your words. Truly. Dominic's smile faltered. His eyes darted to my dress, realizing for the first time I wasn't wearing the pink gown he had approved. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, but he maintained his public mask. Come up here, darling. I'm afraid I can't do that, I said, my voice eerily calm. The entire ballroom held its breath. The tension was palpable. You see, Dominic, while I appreciate the sentiment, I cannot marry you. A collective gasp rippled through the elite crowd. Arthur Hayes gripped the banister, his face flushing red. Chloe dropped her champagne flute. The glass shattered loudly against the marble floor. Clara, what is this? Dominic laughed nervously, gripping the microphone so hard his knuckles turned white. Is this a joke because it's not funny? It's not a joke, I said smoothly. I looked directly at Chloe, locking eyes with her. She paled, taking a step back. I let my gaze drift back to Dominic. I cannot marry a boy who still needs his maid of honor to keep him warm at night. Dead silence, then absolute chaos. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Cameras flashed from the press section. Dominic's face drained of all color, turning a sickly, terrified gray. He staggered back a step, as if I had physically struck him. Clara, how? He stammered, the smooth facade completely shattering. He looked at Chloe, who was practically shrinking into the floor, tears of panic welling in her eyes. But I do have an announcement. I continued, speaking over the rising din. I am getting married. I turned toward the back of the room. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as Nathaniel Hayes strode forward. He looked like a god of war descending upon a battlefield of mere mortals. The dark suit, the lethal grace of his stride. The cold, calculating gaze he commanded the room without uttering a single word. He reached my side and without hesitation wrapped a possessive arm around my waist, pulling my back flush against his chest. Dominic looked as though he was staring at a ghost. The terror in his eyes was visceral, primal. Nate! Dominic breathed into the mic, his voice trembling. What are you doing? Let her go. Nathaniel took the microphone from my hand. He looked up at his younger brother, a predatory smirk playing on his lips. She's not yours to claim any more, little brother. Nathaniel's voice rumbled through the speakers, dark and absolute. Clara and I were married in a private civil ceremony 45 minutes ago. He held up my left hand. Resting on my ring finger was a massive, flawless, emerald-cut diamond. The ballroom exploded into a frenzy of shouts and camera flashes. Arthur Hayes looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Dominic stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, his mind unable to comprehend that his docile, obedient prey had just willingly walked into the jaws of the only beast he feared. I looked up at Dominic, and for the first time since I woke up in this second life, I smiled a genuine, terrifying smile. Welcome to your nightmare, Dominic. I've already lived through mine. The flashbulbs were blinding. They popped like a relentless barrage of gunfire as Nathaniel and I exited the Plaza Hotel, flanked by his private security detail. The press had swarmed the exits the moment the word marriage left Nathaniel's lips. Reporters were screaming my name, shoving microphones over the shoulders of burly men in earpieces, demanding to know how the darling of the Hayes family had jumped from the golden boy to the ruthless black sheep in a matter of hours. I didn't flinch. I kept my chin high, my posture immaculate. Nathaniel's hand rested on the small of my back, a heavy grounding weight. He didn't rush. He moved with the terrifying, predatory grace of a man who owned the pavement he walked on. We climbed into the back of his waiting armored Maybach. The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off the chaotic roar of the paparazzi. The tinted windows plunged the cabin into a thick, insulated silence. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The car glided away from the curb, merging into the Boston traffic. I allowed myself a single, shuddering exhale, closing my eyes as the adrenaline crash hit me. My hands, resting in my lap, began to tremble. If you are going to regret this, Clara, tell me now so I can have my lawyers begin the annulment paperwork, Nathaniel said. His voice was a low velvet rumble in the dark. I opened my eyes and looked at him. He was watching me closely, the streetlights flickering across his sharp profile. There was no warmth in his gaze, only clinical observation. He was waiting for the frightened little girl he thought I was to crack. I don't do regrets, Nathaniel, I said, my voice steadying. I do results. A faint, dangerous smile played at the corner of his mouth. He reached into the compartment between us and poured 2 glasses of scotch from a crystal decanter. He handed one to me. 2 results then? He murmured, clinking his glass against mine. You played my family beautifully tonight. Arthur looked like he swallowed a lemon, and Dominic... Nathaniel paused, taking a slow sip. Dominic looked like he had seen a ghost. He has no idea, I thought. Dominic is weak, I said smoothly, letting the amber liquid burn down my throat. He hides behind his charm and your father's money. I simply pulled back the curtain. Nathaniel shifted, turning his body fully toward me. The sudden shift in proximity was intoxicating and suffocating all at once. You're lying to me, Clara. My heart gave a violent thump. Excuse me. You didn't marry me just to embarrass him at a party? Nathaniel stated, his ice blue eyes piercing right through my meticulously crafted armor. 3 days ago, you were picking out floral arrangements with his mother Beatrice. You were the picture of the perfect subservient bride. Then suddenly, you corner me in a library, offer me the exact corporate leverage I need, and orchestrate a public execution of your own engagement. He leaned closer, the scent of bergamot and expensive leather wrapping around me. Women like you don't snap overnight without a catalyst. So I will ask you once, and you will tell me the truth. What did my little brother do to you? I stared into his eyes. In my past life, Nathaniel Hayes was a ghost, a name whispered in boardrooms to frighten junior executives. Dominic had kept me far away from him, painting him as a monster who would destroy me for sport. But looking at him now, I didn't see a monster. I saw a weapon. My weapon. He killed me, I whispered. It slipped out before I could stop it, the raw, unvarnished truth of a timeline that no longer existed. Nathaniel's brow furrowed, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his face. I caught myself quickly pivoting. He killed the woman I was... I corrected my tone, hardening into ice. I found out he and Chloe had been sleeping together in my bed. I found out they were planning to use my architectural firm, Montgomery Design, as a shell company to funnel money out of the Hayes Foundation. Once we were married, he was going to bleed my family's legacy, dry frame me for the embezzlement, and divorce me, taking my shares as a settlement to keep me out of prison. It was a brilliant lie, entirely woven from the threads of what I knew was actually going to happen next year. It provided the perfect motive without making me sound like a lunatic who had drowned in a past life. Nathaniel stared at me for a long, agonizing minute. I could see the gears turning in his brilliant, calculating mind. He was cross-referencing my claims with what he knew of his brother's character. Finally, he leaned back against the leather seat. "He is stupid enough to try the embezzlement," Nathaniel mused, his voice laced with contempt. "And greedy enough to use you to do it. But he underestimated you." "Everyone underestimated me, Nathaniel, including you." "Not anymore, wife," he said softly. The word sent a strange shiver down my spine. The Maybach pulled into the private underground garage of his fortress-like penthouse in the Seaport district. "Welcome home, Clara," Nathaniel said as the driver opened the door. "Let's see how much damage we can do by morning." The fallout was catastrophic, and I loved every second of it. By 8 a.m. the next morning, the financial markets had reacted. Shares in Hayes Global dipped as rumors of family instability ran rampant. By 9 a.m., my phone had 147 missed calls, 40 of them from Dominic, 20 from Chloe, and the rest from confused friends and furious Hayes family retainers. I blocked all of them. I sat at the massive marble island in Nathaniel's kitchen, wearing one of his oversized white dress shirts over my silk nightgown, sipping black coffee. Spread out before me were the financial blueprints of the Hayes Foundation's upcoming charity project, the Silver Point Waterfront Initiative. In my past life, I had designed the entire waterfront complex. I knew every structural stress point, every overpriced contractor, and every hidden loophole Dominic had built into the budget to siphon funds into offshore accounts. Nathaniel walked into the kitchen, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, adjusting his cufflinks. He stopped taking in the sight of me in his shirt, surrounded by his competitors' blueprints. "You look dangerous," he noted, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "I'm working," I replied, tapping a pen against a specific line item. "The board meets at 10 to finalize the waterfront initiative. Dominic is going to pitch Harrison and Locke as the primary contractors. They are notoriously expensive, but he will argue they are the only ones who can handle the structural load of the cantilevered glass pavilions." "And?" Nathaniel asked, leaning against the counter. "And?" I smiled a sharp, feral thing. "Harrison and Locke is a subsidiary of a shell corporation owned by Chloe's father. Dominic is trying to pay his mistress's family with foundation money. Furthermore, the cantilevered design they are proposing is flawed. The soil composition at Silver Point can't support the load without deep-pile bedrock anchoring, which isn't in their budget. It will collapse within 5 years. Nathaniel looked at me, a genuine spark of admiration in his cold eyes. "You really did your homework, Clara." "I hold 20% of the voting shares in the foundation inherited from my father," I reminded him. "And as your wife, I now hold your proxy for your 15%. That gives me 35% of the room. I'm going to the board meeting." At 9:55 a.m., I walked into the glass-walled boardroom on the 40th floor of the Hayes Global Tower. The room was buzzing with hushed, frantic whispers. The moment my heels clicked on the hardwood floor, the room fell dead silent. Arthur Hayes sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of restrained fury. Dominic sat to his right, looking pale, exhausted, and incredibly desperate. He had dark circles under his eyes. He clearly hadn't slept. Standing in the corner holding a clipboard and trying to look invisible was Chloe. She was the foundation's PR liaison. "Clara," Arthur said, his voice clipped, "you have considerable nerve showing your face here after the stunt you pulled last night." "It's my legal right to be here, Arthur," I said, pulling out the chair directly across from Dominic. I placed my leather portfolio on the table. "I am here as a voting member and as the proxy for my husband Nathaniel." Dominic flinched at the word husband. His eyes met mine, filled with a sickening mixture of betrayal, anger, and deep-seated panic. Clara, please, can we talk about this privately? You're making a mistake. Nate is a monster. He's brainwashing you. Let's stick to the agenda, Dominic, I said coldly, opening my portfolio. I believe we are here to vote on the Silver Point contracts. For the next 45 minutes, I systematically dismantled Dominic's life. When he proudly presented the Harrison and Locke proposal, I distributed copies of the soil analysis reports that I had personally expedited from an independent surveyor at 6 a.m. I highlighted the structural flaws in front of the entire board. I watched Dominic's face drain of color as I mathematically proved his design would result in a catastrophic collapse. Furthermore, I continued, my voice echoing in the quiet room, I have taken the liberty of pulling the corporate registration for Harrison and Locke. It traces back to a holding company in the Caymans, which coincidentally is managed by Silas Barrett, Miss Chloe Barrett's father. All eyes turned to the corner of the room. Chloe dropped her clipboard. It clattered loudly against the floor. She looked like a deer in the headlights, her mouth opening and closing silently. Dominic! Arthur Hayes rumbled, his voice dark with rage. Is this true? Are you attempting to award a $50 million contract to your PR assistant's family? Father, it's not what it looks like. Dominic stammered, his polished charisma entirely failing him. He was sweating. Clara is lying. She's doing this to get back at me because we had a fight. I'm voting no on the proposal, I stated clearly. And with my shares and Nathaniel's, the motion is dead. I motion to award the contract to Vanguard Construction, a firm that actually knows how to build on coastal soil. The board murmured in agreement. Arthur Hayes looked at his youngest son with absolute disgust. Motion carried. Dominic, you and I will be having a very long conversation in my office. Chloe, clear out your desk. You are terminated effective immediately. Chloe let out a strangled sob and ran out of the room. As the board members filed out, Dominic slammed his hands on the table, leaning over to glare at me. His hazel eyes were wild, stripped of their usual warmth. What the hell is wrong with you? He hissed, his voice trembling with a rage I had never seen in him during my past life. You ruined me. I loved you. I stood up slowly, looking down at him. You don't know what love is, Dominic. You only know what you can use. You wanted to play games with my life, fine. But I changed the rules, and I am going to take everything from you. I walked out of the boardroom, leaving him standing alone in the wreckage of his own making. The revenge was sweet, but as I stepped into the elevator, a cold realization washed over me. I had just backed a rat into a corner. And a cornered rat is capable of terrible things. 3 weeks had passed since the gala. True to the contract, Nathaniel's 35th birthday came and went, and because he was legally and stably married, the controlling shares of Hayes Global transferred entirely to him. Arthur Hayes was forced into an early, bitter retirement. Nathaniel was now the undisputed king of Boston, and I was his queen. Our marriage was a strange, heavily guarded dance. We slept in separate wings of the penthouse, but in public, we were a unified, terrifying front. Nathaniel was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. When we attended charity dinners, his hand was always on my waist. When reporters threw invasive questions at me, a single icy glare from him shut them down. He was fiercely protective of his investment, and slowly, terrifyingly, I found myself relying on that heavy, dark presence. Dominic, meanwhile, was unraveling. Cut off from the foundation's slush funds and demoted to a meaningless vice president role under Nathaniel's new regime, his social standing had plummeted. The tabloids had a field day with the Hayes family civil war. Chloe had vanished, likely realizing Dominic was no longer her ticket to luxury. It was a rainy Tuesday evening. I had stayed late at the offices of Montgomery Design, finalizing the new blueprints for the Silver Point project. The building was mostly empty. The rhythmic drumming of the rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows was the only sound in my office. Suddenly, the heavy glass door of my suite was shoved open. I looked up from my drafting table. Dominic stood in the doorway. He was drenched, his designer suit clinging to him, his hair plastered to his forehead. He smelled of cheap whiskey and desperation. The golden boy was gone. Standing before me was a hollowed-out shell of a man. "Dominic!" I said, my heart rate spiking slightly, though I kept my face impassive. "You are trespassing. Get out before I call security." He slammed the door shut behind him and locked it. "Security went home, Clara. I checked." He slurred slightly, taking a step toward me. His eyes were bloodshot and erratic. "You won. Are you happy? You took my father. You took my money. You took my pride. You ruined my life." "Though you ruined your own life," I replied, standing up and discreetly sliding my hand toward the heavy brass paperweight on my desk. "I just sped up the process." "Why?" he yelled, slamming his fist onto a nearby filing cabinet. "Why did you do it? You were supposed to be mine. You were supposed to be the perfect, quiet little wife. And then what Dominic—" I snapped the anger from my past life boiling over. "You drug my champagne. You pushed me off the Ocean Queen in the middle of the Atlantic." The words echoed in the quiet office. Dominic froze. The drunken haze seemed to evaporate from his eyes, replaced by a shock so profound it looked like he had been struck by lightning. He staggered back, his jaw dropping. "How?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "How do you know about the Ocean Queen?" It was my turn to freeze. The Ocean Queen was his prized yacht. He had bought it in the original timeline after we were married. He wasn't supposed to own it yet. He wasn't supposed to have planned the murder yet. The boat was supposed to be an anniversary gift to himself next year. "I bought that boat in secret last month." Dominic stammered, his eyes wide with genuine horror, staring at me as if I were a demon. "Under a shell company. I haven't told anyone. I haven't even told Chloe. How do you know its name? How do you know what I—" He stopped, swallowing hard. A chilling realization washed over me, freezing the blood in my veins. He hadn't just made a spur-of-the-moment decision to kill me for the shares next year. He had been planning it before we even got engaged. The entire marriage was going to be a premeditated execution. The poison, the boat, the drop in the ocean, it was all meticulously designed from the very beginning. Before either of us could process the gravity of the slip-up, the glass door to the office shattered. Dominic screamed as a heavy object, a fire extinguisher, smashed through the tempered glass. The lock gave way and the door swung open violently. Standing in the doorway, surrounded by falling shards of glass, was Nathaniel. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored suit. He was in a black trench coat, rain dripping from his broad shoulders. His eyes were locked on Dominic, and the expression on his face was one of pure, unadulterated violence. The aura of danger I had sensed in him at the gala was nothing compared to this. He looked like a predator that had just found another animal near its mate. "Step away from my wife." Nathaniel's voice was deathly quiet, carrying over the sound of the rain. Dominic whimpered, stumbling backward until he hit the wall. The bravado he had walked in with completely evaporated. "Nate, I just came to talk. Nathaniel crossed the room in 3 massive strides. He didn't yell. He didn't posture. He simply reached out, grabbed Dominic by the throat of his wet shirt, and lifted him off his feet. Dominic choked his hands, clawing uselessly at Nathaniel's iron grip. "I warned you!" Nathaniel whispered, leaning in close to his brother's terrified face. "I told you what would happen if you ever came near her again." "Nathaniel, stop," I said. My voice was calm, cutting through the tension. "Don't kill him. He's not worth the paperwork." Nathaniel held him for a second longer, letting Dominic turn a terrifying shade of purple before tossing him to the floor like a piece of garbage. Dominic scrambled backward, gasping for air, clutching his bruised throat. "Leave," Nathaniel commanded, not even looking at him anymore. His eyes were on me, checking for injuries. "If I see you in this city again, I won't use my hands. I'll use my lawyers, and you'll spend the rest of your pathetic life in a federal penitentiary for the Cayman accounts I just found." Dominic didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled to his feet and ran out of the broken door, his footsteps echoing wildly down the hallway until they faded into nothing. The office was dead silent, save for the wind blowing rain through the shattered door. Nathaniel walked over to me. He reached out his large, calloused hand, gently touching my cheek. The contrast between the violence he had just displayed and the immense gentleness of his touch made my breath catch in my throat. "Did he hurt you?" he asked, his voice rough. "No," I whispered. "How did you know he was here?" "I have my head of security tracking his car," Nathaniel said flatly. "When he pulled up to your building, I was already 5 minutes away." He looked at my face, his thumb brushing lightly over my cheekbone. "He asked you a question before I broke the door. He asked how you knew about his boat. And the poison." My stomach plummeted. Nathaniel had heard everything. He stepped closer, his imposing frame shielding me from the cold wind of the storm. "I know you're hiding something from me, Clara. Something impossible. I don't know how you knew about his embezzlement or his mistress or the yacht he bought in secret. And I don't care." He leaned down, his forehead resting gently against mine. The scent of rain and dark cologne wrapped around me entirely. "I don't care if you're a witch, a psychic, or a ghost." Nathaniel murmured, his voice a fierce, possessive vow in the darkness of the office. "You're mine now, and whoever you were before, she's safe with me." I closed my eyes, leaning into the warmth of the man who was supposed to be my monster. For the first time since I woke up in this second life, the icy grip of fear around my heart finally shattered. Dominic was broken. His empire was ashes, and I had traded the devil for a god of war. The weeks following the incident in my office were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Nathaniel and I didn't just share a marriage of convenience anymore. We shared a silent, unbreakable pact. The man Boston whispered about in terrified tones had become my sanctuary. When we attended galas at the Museum of Fine Arts or dined at Oya, the city's elite parted for us. I wore Cartier diamonds that felt like armor, and Nathaniel wore his reputation like a loaded weapon. Meanwhile, the Barrett family was imploding. Nathaniel's forensic accountants had gutted Silas Barrett's offshore holdings. The Cayman Island shell companies, which were supposed to launder the Hayes Foundation money, were exposed to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The IRS froze the Barretts' domestic assets. Chloe, who had lived her entire life on a limitless black Amex, suddenly found her cards declining at Saks Fifth Avenue. But vipers don't just roll over and die. They strike blindly when cornered. It was a crisp Thursday afternoon in late November. I was sitting in the private tea room of the Newbury Boston, looking out over the public garden. I had received a frantic, pathetic email from Chloe, demanding a meeting, claiming she had information that could destroy Nathaniel and me. I agreed to meet her not out of fear, but out of a morbid desire to see the final thrashing of the snake that had once laughed as I drowned. She arrived 20 minutes late, looking disheveled. The designer blowout was frizzy, the Chanel tweed jacket looked slept in, and the dark circles under her eyes couldn't be hidden by her expensive concealer. She slid into the booth across from me, her eyes darting around the elegant room nervously. "You look terrible, Chloe," I said smoothly, taking a sip of my Earl Grey tea. "Stress aging is a very real phenomenon." She sneered, slamming a thick manila envelope onto the pristine white tablecloth. "Cut the high and mighty act, Clara. You think you've won because you married the family psychopath? You think you're untouchable? I think I'm currently drinking a $50 cup of tea while your father is facing federal indictment," I replied, my voice perfectly level. "So yes, comparatively, I am untouchable." "What do you want, Chloe?" She tapped her manicured nails against the envelope. "I have emails, text messages, photographs. I've spent the last month compiling everything Dominic ever told me about Nathaniel's hostile takeovers, the bribes his fixers paid to city zoning commissioners, and the blackmail he used to secure the Silver Point land. I have an editor at Vanity Fair ready to publish this as a 10-page exposé. It will trigger a federal investigation into Hayes Global. Nathaniel will lose the company, and you will lose your billionaire husband." I stared at the envelope. For a brief second, she looked triumphant. She thought she had me cornered. She thought I was still the naive, soft-hearted girl she used to manipulate into doing her college assignments. I started to laugh. It wasn't a nervous chuckle. It was a cold, melodic laugh that caused a few heads in the tea room to turn our way. Chloe's triumphant smile faltered. "What's so funny? Are you delusional?" "No, Chloe. I'm just astonished by your sheer, unadulterated stupidity," I said, reaching out and pulling the envelope toward me. I didn't even open it. I simply slid it into my Prada tote bag. "Hey, that's my leverage," she hissed, lunging forward. My hand shot out, catching her wrist in a vice grip. She gasped, her eyes widening at the sudden physical strength I possessed. "Listen to me very carefully, you pathetic excuse for a friend." I leaned in, dropping my voice to a lethal whisper. "Nathaniel didn't bribe the zoning commissioners. Arthur Hayes did under Dominic's advice 3 years ago. The Silver Point blackmail. That was Silas, your father, coercing the waterfront property owners to sell cheap. Everything in that envelope implicates your father and your former lover." Chloe paled, the blood draining from her face. "You're lying." "I don't need to lie." I let go of her wrist, wiping my hand on a linen napkin as if she had soiled me. "I reviewed the Hayes corporate archives last week. Nathaniel's hands are immaculately clean. He built his venture capital firm from the ground up because he refused to touch Arthur's dirty money. You just handed me the exact documentation Nathaniel's legal team needs to ensure your father gets a 20-year sentence in federal prison instead of 10. Tears welled in Chloe's eyes. Panic, raw and suffocating, finally set in. "Clara, please." Her voice cracked, the malicious veneer completely shattering. "We're losing the house in Beacon Hill. My father is on suicide watch. I have nothing. I can't even get a job in PR because Nathaniel blacklisted me across the entire East Coast. I'm begging you, just give me some money. Let me leave the state." I looked at her, the woman who had worn my fiancé's robe, and called me boring while I was being murdered. "You wanted my life, Chloe," I said softly, standing up from the table. I dropped a crisp $100 bill beside my teacup. "Now you have to live yours." I walked out of the Newberry, leaving her sobbing violently into her hands. The air outside was freezing, but I had never felt warmer. The mistress was vanquished, but the orchestrator was still out there. December arrived in Boston with a brutal biting cold that froze the Charles River. 4 months had passed since the gala. Nathaniel and I had moved past the boundaries of our contract. The shift was subtle at first, a lingering touch on my waist, the way he would stay up late in his study just to read in the same room where I was sketching architectural drafts. Then came the night of the Hayes Global Holiday Charity Ball. We had returned to the penthouse, the adrenaline of the public spotlight fading. Without a word, Nathaniel had followed me into my wing of the apartment. He had taken my face in his hands, looked into my eyes with a burning, quiet intensity, and kissed me. It wasn't a performance for the press. It was a complete, devastating surrender. Since that night, the separate wings were forgotten. I had found something I never knew existed, a partner who viewed my strength not as a threat, but as an asset. But true peace is a luxury the past rarely allows. It was a Tuesday evening, 3 days before Christmas. Nathaniel was in New York finalizing a merger expected back by midnight. I was at the penthouse wrapping a vintage Rolex Daytona I had bought for him. My phone buzzed on the marble counter, an unknown number. Normally, I would ignore it, but the caller ID showed it was pinging from a local Newport, Rhode Island tower. A dark prickle of unease washed over my skin. I answered. Clara. The voice was raspy, hollow, and slurred with alcohol. Dominic. How did you get this number? I demanded, my pulse instantly accelerating. I have my ways. He laughed, a dry, humorless sound that sounded like gravel grinding together. It's amazing what a few $1,000s can buy from a corrupt telecom employee. But I don't have much money left, Clara. You made sure of that. If you're calling to beg Dominic, you're wasting your prepaid minutes. I'm not begging. I'm making a trade, he said. The background noise on his end was distinct. The rhythmic sloshing of water against fiberglass, the clinking of metal rigging in the wind. He was on a boat. I have Lily. My heart stopped dead in my chest. You're lying. Am I? Dominic's voice turned vicious. Your sister came back from London for the holidays, didn't she? Landed at Logan Airport at 4 p.m. today? She was supposed to take a private car to your penthouse, but the driver held up a sign with her name, and she hopped right in. Guess who paid the driver? Dominic, if you touch one hair on her head, I don't want Lily. He screamed, his facade breaking, revealing the absolute madness underneath. I want you. You destroyed my life. You took my company, my father's respect, my future. You ruined everything. Where are you? I demanded, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. I was already walking toward the coat closet, my mind racing 1,000,000 miles a minute. The Newport Marina. Slip 42. It's a yacht called the Ocean Queen, Dominic said. The name of the boat echoed in my ears like a death knell. You come here alone. If I see a single cop, or if Nathaniel shows up with his goons, I'll tie an anchor around Lily's ankles and throw her in the harbor. You have 2 hours. The line went dead. I didn't panic. Panic was for the Clara who died. The Clara who lived was cold, calculating, and married to the most dangerous man on the eastern seaboard. I immediately called Nathaniel. He answered on the first ring. I'm on the tarmac at JFK, wheels up in 5. Nathaniel said, the roar of a jet engine in the background. Dominic has Lily. I said, my voice steady. He's at the Newport Marina. Slip 42. A yacht called the Ocean Queen. Silence on the other end, followed by a string of curses so vile they would have made a sailor blush. I'm rerouting the jet to Providence. My security team in Boston is already mobilizing. Clara, listen to me. Do not go there alone. Do you hear me? Stay in the penthouse. I have to go, Nathaniel. If he sees your men first, he'll kill her. Clara, I will stall him. Just get there. I hung up. I grabbed my keys, a heavy winter coat, and something else from Nathaniel's nightstand, a sleek registered Glock 19. I had asked his head of security to teach me how to use it months ago. I wasn't going to be a victim twice. The drive from Boston to Newport took an agonizing hour and 45 minutes. The snow had started to fall thick and blinding, coating the interstate in white. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel of my Range Rover. When I arrived at the Newport Marina, it was a ghost town. The wealthy yacht owners had long since abandoned their vessels for the winter. The only light came from the swaying sodium vapor street lamps along the docks. I parked a block away and walked through the driving snow. The freezing wind off the Atlantic whipped my hair across my face. I remembered this cold. I remembered the taste of the salt water. I pushed the phantom sensation away. Slip 42. There she was, the Ocean Queen, a 90-foot floating monument to Dominic's ego. The cabin lights were on, casting an eerie yellow glow against the snow. I stepped onto the teak deck, my boots silent. My hand was buried deep in my coat pocket, my fingers wrapped tightly around the grip of the Glock. Dominic! I yelled over the wind. The heavy glass door to the main cabin slid open. Dominic stepped out. He looked unrecognizable. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by a filthy, oversized sweater. His face was unshaven, his eyes hollowed out with manic exhaustion. In his right hand, he held a revolver. "You actually came?" He smiled, but it was a horrific, broken thing. Where is Lily?" I demanded, keeping my distance. Dominic chuckled, raising his free hand to wipe the snow from his eyes. "Lily's fine. She's probably complaining about the Wi-Fi at a Holiday Inn off Interstate 95. The driver took her there and locked her in the room. I just needed bait to get the rat on the ship." Relief washed over me so powerfully my knees nearly buckled. Lily was safe. "Then let's end this, Dominic," I said, staring him down. "It's over. You have no money. You have no family. Fleeing the country is your only option, and you can't even afford the fuel for this boat to get past international waters." "I'm not fleeing," Dominic said, stepping closer. He raised the revolver, pointing it directly at my chest. "I'm fixing my mistake. I don't know what happened to you, Clara. I don't know how you changed. But looking at you now, looking at the ice in your eyes, I should have killed you the day we met." "You did," I whispered the words carrying through the howling wind. "You pushed me off the back of this exact boat. You drugged my champagne, and you and Chloe watched me drown." Dominic froze the gun, trembling in his hand. His eyes widened in absolute terror. What are you talking about?" "That never happened. I bought this boat a month ago." "In this life, yes," I said, pulling my hand out of my coat pocket. I leveled the Glock 19 squarely at his head. My hands didn't shake. "But I remember the cold water, Dominic. And I swore to God that if I ever saw you on this boat again, I would be the one holding the weapon." Dominic stared down the barrel of my gun, his mind utterly fracturing. The alcohol, the stress, and the sheer impossibility of my words broke whatever tenuous grip he had left on reality. He let out a primal, unhinged scream and cocked the hammer of his revolver. "I'll send you back to hell," he roared. "Drop the weapon, Dominic." "Whoa." The voice boomed like thunder across the marina. From the shadows of the adjacent docks, floodlights suddenly snapped on blindingly bright, illuminating the Ocean Queen like a stage. Over the roar of the wind came the thumping blades of a helicopter hovering low over the water. Nathaniel had arrived. And he brought an army. A dozen men in tactical gear swarmed the docks, assault rifles raised. Leading them, stepping onto the gangway of the yacht with lethal intent, was Nathaniel. He wasn't wearing a coat. His suit jacket whipped fiercely in the wind. His eyes were locked on his brother, burning with a rage so terrifying it seemed to heat the freezing air. "Nate!" Dominic whimpered, squinting against the floodlights. He was surrounded. There was nowhere to run. "Drop the gun, little brother." Nathaniel ordered, his voice echoing through a megaphone handed to him by a police captain. "The local PD is here. The FBI is waiting for you in Boston regarding the wire fraud. It's over." Dominic looked wildly around. He looked at the tactical teams, he looked at Nathaniel, and finally, he looked at me. I hadn't lowered my gun. I held his gaze, offering absolutely zero mercy. "You did this," Dominic sneered, crying hysterically now. "You stole him from me! You stole my life!" Instead of dropping the gun, Dominic swung the barrel wildly toward Nathaniel. Bang! The gunshot cracked through the night, deafening and abrupt. But it wasn't Dominic's revolver. It was my Glock. I didn't aim to kill. I aimed with the precision of a woman who had spent months practicing for this exact terrifying moment. The 9mm round tore through Dominic's right shoulder. He shrieked in agony, dropping the revolver as the impact spun him around. He collapsed onto the teak deck, clutching his bleeding shoulder, writhing in the snow. Instantly, the tactical team rushed the deck, kicking Dominic's discarded weapon into the harbor and pinning him to the ground. Handcuffs clicked sharply over his wrists. A medic rushed forward to tend to his wound. I slowly lowered my gun. The adrenaline vanished, replaced by an overwhelming wave of exhaustion. My legs finally gave out. Before my knees could hit the deck, strong arms caught me. Nathaniel pulled me against his chest, holding me so tightly I could hear the frantic pounding of his heart. He buried his face in my hair, inhaling deeply. "You're okay," he chanted almost like a prayer. "You're okay. I've got you." I dropped the gun onto the deck and wrapped my arms around his neck, burying my face in his shoulder. The scent of him, dark grounding, entirely safe, anchored me to the present. "He's gone, Clara," Nathaniel whispered, kissing the top of my head. I turned my head slightly to watch as the police dragged a sobbing, bleeding Dominic down the gangway toward the waiting squad cars. The golden boy of Boston was reduced to a pathetic, broken criminal. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The Ocean Queen would be seized by the feds. The nightmare was finally truly over. "He's gone." I repeated, my voice steady. 6 months later, the Boston spring melted the last of the winter ice. The trial of Dominic Hayes was the media spectacle of the decade. He was convicted of attempted murder, kidnapping, and massive corporate fraud. Chloe Barrett had turned state's evidence against her own father to avoid jail time, disappearing into obscurity, somewhere in the Midwest, working a minimum wage job. I stood on the balcony of the penthouse, the warm evening breeze gently blowing the sheer curtains behind me. I held a glass of champagne, a vintage I had selected myself, poured from a bottle I had opened. Nathaniel stepped out onto the balcony, loosening his tie. He wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "The architects sent over the final renderings for the Silver Point project," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against my back. "They look perfect. Of course they do. I smiled, leaning back against his solid chest. I designed them. He chuckled, turning me around in his arms. The ruthless king of Boston looked down at me with eyes full of absolute, uncompromising devotion. You saved my life, Clara, he said softly, a rare moment of complete vulnerability. I was an island before you walked into that library. And you saved mine, Nathaniel. I reached up, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. In more ways than you will ever know. The past life was a faded photograph washed away by the ocean waves. I didn't drown in the darkness. I weaponized it. I had been murdered by a coward, but I had been reborn as a queen. And as Nathaniel leaned down to kiss me under the Boston stars, I knew one undeniable truth. Revenge is sweet, but living a life of unshakable power with the man you love is the ultimate victory. Wow, what an absolutely insane journey. From a watery grave to ruling the Boston skyline, Clara proved that hell hath no fury, like a woman reborn and armed with the truth. Dominic thought he was playing chess, but Clara flipped the entire board and took his king. What was your favorite moment of Clara's epic revenge? Did you cheer when Nathaniel finally put Dominic in his place on the yacht? Let me know in the comments below. If you loved this intense, twist-filled story of betrayal, power, and ultimate justice, please smash that like button, share this video with a friend, and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss our next dramatic, real-life storytelling experience. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.